we go. And let me move that out of the way. Okay, so can everybody see my screen? All right, got through it, cool. All right, so like I said, the main thing that we're trying to kind of alleviate some confusion about what stipends can be used for, and then also how it pertains to the IBT grant. If you've read through this document, you'll know that there is some guidance towards federal grants, but once again, IBT is a state-funded program. So real quickly, what are stipends? I think everyone kind of has a general idea of what they are, how to use them. But the thing that we want to kind of focus on here today is kind of thinking creatively, right? Because with the IBT grant, we're trying to remove as many barriers as we can for our students. And it's, you know, a lot of things a lot of people take for granted, like transportation, food, childcare, right? So any way that we can help remove those barriers, well, here at the ICCB, we want to help each program be able to accomplish those goals for themselves. So within the grant-funded program, stipends are used to help students cover basic costs, right? While they are involved in activities supported by grants. There's been a couple questions come up where people say, well, can we use the grant funds for FY22 for FY23? And that's kind of seems like a simple answer, but once again, some people within the programs, there's a lot of new people, they don't necessarily know that, right? They are supported by the grants, such as education and training. Basic costs would include income replacement, transportation, and other activities. And we're going to go into a more in-depth explanation of what types of costs and services might stipends support, because here on the ICCB end, we've also been informed that there's some really interesting ways that programs can start using that money, right? One thing to kind of keep in mind is this portion here, ICCB does not provide guidance on the impact of stipends on student financial aid or filings with the IRS. I think that's kind of a big thing to kind of point out here right at the beginning. When are stipends allowable? So I'm going to scroll down here to the state grants portion, because that's the one that pertains to the IBT grant. So for state funded grants, the awarding entity may structure stipends as a funded activity for certain purposes. With respect to state funded grants, the definition of grant funds in the Grant Funds Recovery Act, and there's the number for you if you want to go look it up and do some reading, specifies the monies remain grant funds when dispersed, and the monies need to be used for the grant purpose. So that's the one thing to keep in mind. Every time that a stipend is used, it has to be used for the grant itself. When are stipends generally reasonable? So the NOFO, all that information is in the NOFO. And if you've read through the IBT NOFO, you know that student stipends are an allowable expense. But once again, we want to kind of figure out how can we start thinking creatively of how we can use these stipends, right? The applicant, all of you, will be asked to provide details on how stipends will be structured. So that's kind of important too. We need to make sure, so what are stipends supporting? What's the eligibility for students receiving those stipends? And then also, what is the form of the stipend? Is it going to be a direct cash disbursement? Is it going to be a gift card? Is there some other way that the stipend is going to be structured, right? And how the funds will be distributed and tracked. So justification for the amount of stipends will also be necessary, because once again, we don't want to see, oh, we're just giving everybody, you know, $1,000 or something like that, right? We want to see exactly what that's going to be used for, what's the justification for, and then how is that going to help that student as well. And then the justification, like I said, needs to explain how the stipend benefits your grant program and how the stipends are appropriate. So this is the portion that we're going to kind of focus on very intently, because this is the part where we can start kind of like thinking outside the box, right? So services that would allow, or when are stipends, you know, what type of cost services might stipends support? The services that would be allowable may
I think a voicemail is fine, as long as you just give them your contact number. And then they can.
My stuff is pretty same every day.
Well, yeah.
Oh, you got
And then
unmuted here. I'm sorry, I might have to. Sorry. Okay, so one thing's, and we've kind of talked about these, and I'm sure that a lot of you out in the field are aware of what stipends can be used for, but here's just kind of a general list that we've given out to everybody. So income replacement, right? So if there's some sort of earn and learn model, if there is a way that you are compensating students for attending classes, transportation subsidies, so those could be gas cards, bus cards, any way that you're paying for a student to be able to get to where they need to go, right? Childcare is very big. I've noted that with a lot of students, and this comes from my time as a teacher as well, that childcare is a really big thing, right? Sometimes parents couldn't make it to classes because they couldn't find a babysitter, right? And that's really important. Housing costs, for those who are working, the main thing is that the IBT grant's working with low income, marginalized populations. So housing costs could be a very big thing. I know there's some programs that do actually offer, I'm trying to think, it's a Safe Haven in Chicago, right? They have like an on-site residential area. So like housing costs could benefit them as well. Food benefits. once again, making sure that our students have all the basic needs they need, right, to make sure they can succeed in class. Educational costs such as tuition, books, school supplies, including appropriate technology. So the technology part was something that we had a question come in a few weeks ago, where a program was looking to, well, they were asking if they supplied like a laptop or a piece of technology to a student during the course of the grant, would that student be able to keep that laptop and kind of use that as a, trying to figure out the right word because incentive's not the word, but a way for students to see that they're getting the support they need from the program itself. Like, you know, they're paying into it, they're giving their time, and they're also going to receive some sort of end result, right? And we know that one thing we overlook is that sometimes a lot of these students, they don't have access to laptops, they can't afford them, right? Or tablets. One thing that popped up as well is mobile hotspots. Sometimes in rural areas or even, you know, areas that just have low broadband connection, having a hotspot is something that can help them make sure that they're, you know, able to attend meetings and attend online classes and things like that. So when it comes to technology, you start kind of thinking outside the box of exactly what are students going to need, and that might need some more hands-on guidance with possibly a counselor or advisor with that student. End of program employment assistance, that's big.
Alex, can I interrupt you real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So what did you determine about the laptops? Can the student keep it at the end? What was that?
Yeah, so I talked with Jason and he said that that is allowable. So students could, if you had a piece of technology like a laptop or a tablet and the student went through the program, they would be allowed to keep that. But there is it's contingent upon the requirements set forth by the program. So all of that would have to be, and we're going to get down to that here. That's actually the next section of how we want programs to structure that documentation and keep that on record. So yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. So end of program employment assistance and then legal barrier assistance. So this is something that was very new to me because once again, just the state of Illinois in general has been looking at ways to reintegrate recently incarcerated students back into education, right? To kind of build those talent pipelines. So for programs that are dealing with recently incarcerated, criminal record sealing and expungement fees are also an allowable stipend cost. Also driver's license reinstatement fees, liability insurance fees. So you'll see here that these stipends can be used for a great number of wraparound support services. And I would say that even with, I know that one of the objectives with the IBT grant is to focus primarily on those wraparound services, but I feel other programs, whether you chose objective 1, 2, or 4, right? This is going to be essential, right? Providing those services and breaking those barriers so that students, we can get as many people to succeed, right? One thing here, if a student's continuing in a program series or stackable certificates, the stipends would be allowable to support programs continuation, completion, or retention goals, right? Yeah. One thing to note here is how to classify those, how to actually classify stipends on like a budget form. So if support is given in the form of a gift card, right? So one of your students can't get to class, so you provide a transportation stipend to Shell gas station, right? Something like that. They should be called stipends for the said purpose. For example, so like I just said, stipend for transportation in the form of gift card to Shell. So a stipend for food in the form of Schnucks gift card, or stipend for books in the form of credit at the ABC Community College Bookstore. So once again, it establishes like, this is the stipend, this is the purpose of the stipend, and then where is that stipend going to be used at, right? So the idea is the expense isn't gas gift cards, but rather stipends for transportation. So it's kind of a linguistic thing, right? You got to make sure that you got the semantics all right. But one thing that's going to be important is exactly how you keep track of the stipends as well. There must be some sort of acknowledgement or a verification by the grantee staff that includes the minimum of the following items. Oh, excuse me. Note that each disbursement must have this mandatory documentation. So there must be a form of acknowledgement. Explains to the student the conditions of using the stipend. So say we go back to the example of the laptop, right? So at the very beginning, you sit down with the student and you have your document filled out, and you'll say that contingent upon maybe this performance measure or attendance measure or even completion of the program, the student will receive and be able to keep that laptop, right? And I know that everyone has a different way of doing things. We don't want to tell programs how to, I guess, conduct their business, right? But we just want to provide guidance. A student's signature on the acknowledgement. So the student must sign the acknowledgement. They must, it's a contract, right? In a way. The verification must include the name of the student provided the stipend, indicate that the grantee staff presented to the student the conditions of the stipend and how it supports grant activities, and then also the amount. And then also at the very end, once again, you got to make sure your signature's on that. We are not going to require this documentation to be sent into us because, once again, that's a lot of paperwork, right? And plus two, we want programs to be able to create those documents themselves and to have those on records, because if there ever is any questions about program X over here, we want to see exactly what they were using their stipends for. Do they have the documentation? We can reach back out to you all in the field to make sure that all that's there. Like I said, it needs to be available on request. So I know I kind of just covered a lot of things there, and I kind of threw a lot of information at you. And like I said, this is the document I sent out earlier. So I'm trying to think. Angela, do you want to go ahead with before we go into questions?
No, mine's a little bit different. So let's try to answer some questions for yours first.
Okay,
there
that's
was
fine.
a
Yeah.
question that came up in the chat while you were talking. If the program is going to pay for a student's internet, do you pay the student or do you pay the internet provider directly?
Let me find that question here. Pay the student or pay the
from Adam Lovell?
That's a good question. I don't necessarily have the answer for that.
I would suspect because it's a stipend to the student, I would suspect you need to pay the student directly.
Okay.
But your line would be internet stipend in the form of check to the student for internet provider, however, I don't remember exactly that wording that you used. Sorry, Alex, I don't have it memorized. But but that phrasing that you would then pay the student, because then otherwise you're going to have, the program is going to have to get provider information, like the internet providers 1099 and all of that to cut a check to that. I mean, that's right. I would bet that most of your programs are going to go, yeah, no. Pay the student directly.
Just pay them directly, and yeah, I understand that. Yeah, but then, like you mentioned, there would have to be some sort of verification, I imagine, for that the stipend was used for that service, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, let's look here. Driving and parking tickets. This comes from Mary. So I know that's a part of that falls into the possibly the legal category that we were kind of talking about. Once again, I'll have to reach out to Jason for that just to get a quick clarification. And Mary, I'll make sure to take down your information.
Legal fees, those are typically more penalty related.
Yeah.
I mean, which can be legal fees, but you're getting into a gray area.
That's what it's that middle.
Yes.
Yeah,
check with Jason.
That's a good question though, because perhaps it could be, right? Okay, and then Al, gift cards. Is this okay even though gas station sells tobacco and alcohol? Does this apply to places like Amazon too?
So I would say if you're saying it's for transportation for gas at the Shell station, it's kind of like that internet provider thing. You have specified what it's for. If they make a bad decision, then that's on the student. And I also probably wouldn't give them $100 in gas cards at a time. Probably 25, 30. Now you may budget way more than that, but you may have to do it multiple times, if that makes sense.
Like a disbursement through.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you don't turn into the funder of the local weekend Friday night activities.
And then do they have to submit verification like a receipt? You mentioned verification on the internet. Do they have to submit a receipt or something showing they bought gas? Or is it just enough to say, I reviewed it with them and we provided the stipend for that purpose?
I guess
I
it was
add to your list of questions to ask Jason,
yeah,
Alex.
That is a big thing, because it's something that came up during the course of all this is how do we know that the stipends are going to be going towards what they're set for, right? You know, if you give someone a Casey's gift card, you're not totally sure if they're going to get gas or if they're going to go in there and get, you know, like someone mentioned, tobacco, or there's alcohol there, right? So you want to make sure that these stipends are being used for their purpose. So I will ask Jason here, actually probably directly after this meeting, and I should have an answer out to everybody in the field here shortly.
And the answer may be that it depends on your program or institution.
True.
I mean, it may be that we don't need the verification, but check with your program to see what they think.
Right.
Could the verification be actually in the form of the student's signature on that contract that they sign with us?
That could be.
And could we not say, I mean, I know this doesn't always help the first time, but we give them a stipend to promote because they're attending at a certain percentage and to help them continue that attendance, and then they're going to use it for whatever they need to do that, you know. It just eliminates all of this really difficult documentation. You know, if your stipend is for because you've attended at 70%, this stipend is to help you keep that attendance at 70%. And as long as you're doing that, you're going to get this. I don't know. I haven't thought it all the way through, but something.
No, I think I'm sorry.
That's it.
I was going to say, yeah, Levon and I were talking about that. There has to be some sort of, in kind of we mentioned earlier, the disbursement basis, right? We don't want to give them, you know, $300 up front for things, right? So if there's some sort of way that your program can devise a way to maybe disperse those based on attendance, based on a performance, things like that, or if the stipend is contingent upon completion of the program, right? So that's a good point. Thank you. And then I'll just go back to your question here real quick. For Amazon. So once again, that's kind of a big bag, right? I mean, you can go on Amazon and get everything these days. You could, you know, you get your school supplies, or you could go buy, you know, new shoes. You could get whatever you want on there, right? So I think that kind of goes back to, that's up to the program's discretion. But once again, if you said Amazon gift card for the purpose, or a school supply stipend for the purpose at Amazon, right? There would have to be some kind of clarification and try to justify that stipend itself. Kathy, I'm going down to you. So can we use this guidance for other ICCB grants and even apply it to how we document federal grant funded stipends? So there is a portion on there that mentions because me personally, I don't work directly with a federal funded grant, so that's not my area of expertise. But this is guidance that was given for all of the grants at ICCB. So this isn't just particularly towards IBT. I would reach out to whoever your contact is with, say the Pell Grant or the PATH Grant, or, you know, Angela's on the CAPA Grant, right? So I'd say reach out to your direct contact there for clarification. Could ask for internet bills. Okay. Verification of the stipend is used for internet. We kind of touched on that. Okay, so Val has a question here. Well, college fees that are owed that keeps folks from enrolling in college. So I know that there's been a lot of talk about that here lately, where a lot of students, they withhold the ability to enroll in classes or retrieve transcripts because of outstanding fees. And I think that's something that's kind of being worked on in the legislative portion there. I think State of Illinois has had that question for a while, and I've seen it come up in articles trying to reintegrate a lot of adult learners back into the community college system. So I don't necessarily have a particular answer on that, but maybe that's something to discuss with the registrar's office. Maybe if there's a way that a stipend could be used for expunging previous debt. Might be a question to ask. So I like that. Okay, so Nicole, if we extend stipends cumulative over 600, should we create 1099s for participants? Angela?
So that relates back to that statement of ICCB does not provide guidance on financial aid and IRS stipulations. My non-ICCB hat says probably, and check with your budget office. But I'm not saying that as an ICCB person. I'm saying that as a human that goes, ooh, $600 is that limit. That's I gotta check with somebody on that one. But I would bet that ICCB, I mean, you could ask Jason, Alex, but I'm pretty sure Jason's going to say, have them check with their individual budget offices. And it's probably a yes, but
yeah,
no, I'll put my ICCB hat back on.
Okay, we got few more questions here. So let's go down to Paula. So can you give a practical example of if a student is continuing in a stackable certificate, the stipends would be allowable to support a program's continuation completion? In my mind, I believe that stipends can be used to possibly pay for certifications. Is that right, Angela?
I mean, from the way that is read, and I have not done a lot of research on this, the way this is written, I would say potentially yes, but it would also be that if they start in like a CNA and then they move into a nursing program and they still need childcare support, you could potentially help with that childcare support.
So continuation
It may
along.
not be a college specific fees type of thing or a tuition, but the way I read that was that it could continue that way. But again, it would have to be out of grant dollars while you have the grant dollars. And if they're continuing on next year and you don't have the grant next year, that doesn't help next year. But if they're in CNA the first half, and then in the second half, they go into nursing and you're able to help with that while you still have grant funds, that's how I read that.
Right.
Sometimes you can get them started a little bit too and get them, and then you can help them get financial aid, and it could, you know, it's maybe that's a way to do it. I don't know.
And then Brett here, we have, if you do internet reimbursement and mileage reimbursement, is that handled different than an upfront stipend? So once again, I believe when it comes to, once again, keeping track of all of the ways that if you want to, your program wants to say, we're going to track mileage for our students to make sure, once again, that the stipends are being used. I think that kind of depends on the program's discretion at that point.
Because it's also the difference between a reimbursement after the fact and a stipend upfront. Those are financially, those are two different terms. So that may be a check with your budget office as to what do they need upfront versus back end.
Right. Okay, and then Lindsay, how are other places calculating the amount of transportation stipends? So does anybody have any way with their grant currently? Are there any ways that anybody is currently tracking transportation stipends?
No.
Because I know there are some programs that are using the IBT funds for those transportation stipends. I didn't know if anybody had any insight to share.
We either pay directly for bus tokens or bus passes,
Okay.
or we give stipends based on other things. And then students choose to use those stipends for transportation if they need it.
Okay.
I mean, it's a tough one.
Once again, I think consulting with possibly your budget department to see exactly how they want to keep track of all that is essential too, right? Got a few more questions here, and then I'm going to give the floor to Angela because she's got some stuff for you. Could these funds be used to cover unpaid wages from clinical hours in a nursing apprenticeship educational program residency? Now that is an interesting question. Because I don't know if that goes into dealing with the employer itself or the apprenticeship program. Angela, do you have any insight on that?
I would ask Jason.
That's a Jason question.
I have no answer for that question. I read that and I was like, "Ooh, that's a really good question."
That's it's a very good question. So I will make sure.
I think there'd be a way to do it without it. I wouldn't call it a wage, you know, but
yeah.
Maybe classify in a different way, right? Okay, Mark.
We're doing something similar to that with our program with diesel mechanics. So but we wrote it into our program. So we asked up front, and they said, yeah, as long as that's a part of your program plan to pay the students to work in a diesel truck shop over the summer between classes, that was fine. But it had to be a part of our plan to just pay it.
it's like work-based learning incentive,
Yeah, exactly.
not incentive, not sorry.
On the job training.
Yeah,
I know, and that incentive kind of comes in the next question because Mark asked here. I just heard incentive for completion of a program. So incentive, don't call it incentive. There's different ways to classify it. It's just my mind kind of slips sometimes, a little Freudian slip. Because incentive stipends are not permissible. But once again, when it comes to what you want to see what is allowable, just feel free to ask directly to either Levon or I, And we can also get I'm going to put Jason Golden's email here down in the chat once we're done with our meeting, because he's our primary fiscal contact for the IBT grant. And if you have any questions that possibly, like I said, you want to go straight to him and just get the answer, I can put that down there as well. Okay, and Gwen, if this policy is applicable to all ICSP grants, what date does this go into effect? I don't know if there is necessarily a particular date that this went into effect. I believe that this was just a piece of information that was clarified from our fiscal department. They wanted us to send out programmatically to speak with. So I don't believe this is anything that is completely brand new. It's just, once again, a new clarification. So I would say that, once again, if you're still working on the FY22 grant and you have an extension, or once again, we're all here because FY23, this would count for both those. Okay, and then Dr. Ivory, would not the reasonable disbursement amount be different depending the cost of living in your area? Example, gas or housing, et cetera, in Chicago is very different than Northern Illinois. So once again, that kind of comes up to the discretion of the program. Once again, if you look at the housing costs and food costs, gas costs in Chicago, they might be higher than someplace in like Galesburg, Illinois, Carl Sandburg, right? So that's kind of up to the discretion. So once again, kind of allotting where you're going to use those funds and how much is going to be given to the students as a stipend, that's up to the program's discretion as well. Okay, so Patty, if it is directly applied to tuition, for instance, with 1099, once again, I think that's, like Angela said, this part of me is kind of like, I think so, but check with the your budget division as well, because ICCB can't give that or give guidance on that. Okay, so Paula, would an email acknowledgement serve as a substitute for a student's signature? Much of what we do with students is digital. We provided a digital code to use Amazon for books. What would serve as a signature?
I would say if it's all laid out within the email, kind of like the form, and you have them make some sort of statement along the lines of, I agree and know that this is what I'm supposed to be doing with these funds, and hit send, then that's their name. It's date stamped, time stamped. I mean, that information's all there. Right. So, I mean, Alex, you can confirm that, because I don't want to overstep into what you and Levon and Alex have talked about or decided. But I mean, as much as signature allowability has improved in the last 3 years because of COVID, true, I would suspect that an email would be sufficient confirmation. And I'll check with Jason here in a little bit, because once again, if you're working with students primarily in the digital format, that's going to be big, right? So yeah, I'll make sure. Like I said, like you said, Angela, I think that would. I mean, you have all the information there, right? You have the date stamp, you have their confirmation, right? And then our last question here that we have in the chat is from Yvonne. Yes, our stipends for our BNA and ADN students are going to help provide work-based learning opportunities. It's not really a question, just a comment here. Provide work-based learning opportunities or clinicals which are required for their course completion. Okay, so once again, Yvonne kind of provides some insight in how stipends are being used to help with clinicals that are required for their course completion, right? Okay, so before I hand it over to Angela here, does anybody have any questions or concerns, anything that popped up while we were talking?
Yeah, actually, this is Mike from World Relief. I was wondering if I could ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I just wanted to clarify, for example, in our program, we plan on helping to pay for training programs once they complete our bridge. For example, go to a CNC program, training program, IT program, where it's not going to be fully covered. Maybe you can correct me, but our thought of giving them some of the money to pay for that training, is that considered a stipend? And two, just wondering what other programs are doing or what you suggest as far as, should we be paying that training facility directly, or just writing a check to the client? I mean, some of those types of questions have been asked, but I'm just being a little bit more specific in this example.
No, it's a good question. I think that when it comes to the discretion of, whether to pay the student directly, and hopefully they use the money to, once again, use that for the training provider. So Dr. Hansel says we pay the institution directly. So this part of me over here, not the ICCB brain, but myself, I feel like possibly the best thing to do is to pay the institution directly. That's what I would say.
Is that considered a stipend or just a grant that we're providing to a student in the program?
It's a good question.
I mean, we don't consider it a stipend, but I'm not sure. It depends on what's allowable in whichever grant you're using. So that is why this is that's a good question. I mean, it's allowable to pay tuition and fees or out of many grants. And if they're bridging into post-secondary and that's your grant, it seems like it might be, but I wouldn't think of it as a stipend necessarily, but I don't know, others probably have.
Looks like here in the chat. So Julie said here, when I wrote the grant, I called it a scholarship, and then we would pay the college directly. And then Dr. Hansel says that we consider it a stipend. I mean, when we go back and we look at that document, I feel like it could be considered a stipend. But at the same time, I think there's other ways that it can be classified on a budget form. It could be scholarship, right? And once again, that's kind of up to all of you, right? How you want to classify that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Anyone else? Going once, going twice. Okay. Angela, I'll give you the floor.
So the main reason I'm here is one, to help Alex with answer some of few questions, but clearly I wasn't really as much help as some of you were because of your expertise and knowledge and longevity working with ICCB on some of the grants. But the other reason that I'm here is because I know there's been confusion in the past. Programs that receive IBT funding to build or implement a bridge program or an IET or ICAPS program, then assume that it comes with an automatic approval of that program because you received IBT grant funds to build it, it's just automatically approved. The problem with that is while ICCB is giving you grant funds to build it, we don't really know what you built. I mean, we think you built it and we think you were successful, but like in FY20, a lot of programs were building things and then everything came crashing to a halt because of this thing called COVID that we're familiar with. And so we didn't issue, I mean, there were no approvals because we don't know what you built. So the point of all that is if you are a program that is building a bridge or an IET ICAPS and want to count it with your adult ed program, if you're doing this on your own, you're not connected to adult ed, tune me out, you're fine. If you're doing this in connection to adult ed, and I'm looking about because I know she does a little bit of everything at Lewis and Clark, she would have to also submit an approval for either the bridge or the ICAPS so she could count it in her adult ed side of things. So what I'm going to put in the chat, if I can make all of my screens do exactly what I want them to do, is we have a jot form proposal link for bridge and one for ICAPS. And I think it just showed up in the chat, hopefully. Thank you, Val. So if you are one of those people that this year wrote for IBT money, you're building a bridge, you're building an ICAPS, and you need to get it approved to count for your adult ed side, those are the links that you would need to submit. The bridge, because it's more general, has fewer questions. The ICAPS is more detail oriented, it has more questions in it. I mean, just different pieces. The other thing I'm going to put in the chat, if I can talk and type at the same time, is my email. So if you get off of this and at the end of this year, you're like, okay, I don't remember where that link is, I'm never going to find it again, you are welcome to reach out to Alex. You're welcome to email me. Patty says she can't see the jot form. And Liz said, I don't see the links. Did the links come in the chat? Did anybody else see the links?
I think it might have went just to one.
Oh,
yeah. Oh,
well,
All the no's at once.
Val is special. Val is laughing hysterically because I private
She said, "Yeah, I
messaged
got 'em."
them to Val.
It
So
was
let's
my
get
fault.
this-
It was my fault.
How
There
about
we
now?
go. There
Can
we
you
go. I see
now?
it, Angela. You're good.
And so I'm guessing my email also went directly to Val, didn't it? It did. So let me try that one again. See, this is Val's fault because she was asking me a question. It was work related, don't worry. But I had my setting Gerber ding. Sorry, trying to remember how to spell and type my last name. Okay, now you are welcome. Patty, can you see that one? Now you can hopefully see the links. If you have questions, you can reach out to me. But again, if you're in October, November of this year and you're like, okay, so there was something said, I don't remember who that was, I don't remember the email, reach out to Alex or Levon. I work with both of them on a daily basis. We're all in the same division, so hourly basis. You can reach out to them and ask, and they will be happy to share my information with you. So there's a ton of resources that can help you with any of this. So, but I just wanted to put that reminder out there that just because you're building it with IBT funds, which are ICCB funds, that does not mean it comes with an automatic approval. There is one more step you need to do to make it be able to count with your adult ed side. And yes, I will make sure I get those links to Alex. So when he's sending a follow-up email, he can include those.
Right. And then also include all the contact information. I know this has already been provided probably 100 times, but I put in Levon's email, my email, and then also Jason Golden. Like I said, he's our primary fiscal contact for the IBT grant. So make sure if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You can reach out to one of us, two of us. If you want to put all three of us on there, that's fine as well. That'll kind of make sure that everyone sees the question. We can get an answer as quickly as possible. Cool. Does anybody have any other questions? Like I said, this wasn't meant to be a very large meeting. We wanted to kind of meet. Oh, hold on a second. Alex, you mentioned that if we need to pay for fall, we may need an extension. Is that correct? I remember mentioning extensions because there was a few programs that did have extensions for FY22. So that kind of bleeds over into, I believe, into the fall a little bit. So Adobo, let me take your email and then I can reach out to you directly. We can talk about that a little bit more. Okay, does anybody have any final thoughts, any burning questions?
This is Kathy Swinson. How's everybody?
Good.
I just, this is very helpful in going through this. So I'm thinking most of everything I've ever done on grants has been a reimbursement. And if I'm going to use a stipend, I think I'd try to keep it as simple as possible. But, you know, like someone said earlier, is you're doing it because they're meeting certain goals and they get a certain amount of money, and then that money is supposed to go towards support for their education, and then they make those choices to keep it simple. But it also sounds like to me that we need to sit down with our business office with ideas of what we'd like to do and get that figured out, and then make sure with ICCB that what we want to do is correct. Just kind of as a summary, yeah?
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, because there's a lot of, like the whole Amazon thing, I wouldn't want to get into that, you know, so
Right.
keep it simple as possible, but okay. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
And I've made the comment multiple times, you have to keep your business and your finance departments happy. I mean, yes, we are your funder and we can tell you what's allowable and not allowable, but there are times that institutions make it, they limit those allowabilities a little bit further for whatever reason. And sometimes they're great reasons, but we're just following what we've been given on grant reasons. So make sure you keep your financial people and your budget people happy because they control a whole lot of your lives.
Right, Lindsay said, amen to keep the business office happy. Yep. The quote of the day. All right, well, if everyone is satisfied, ready to go, I'll go ahead and end the meeting. I will send a follow-up email with, once again, I'll send those JotForm links and I'll put in just all of the information for contacts here at the ICCB. And if you have any questions that you want to reach out to individually with anyone, Angela, Levon, Jason, or I, feel free to reach out. We're always here for you. That's why we do what we do, right? So thank you all for coming today. So have a good Friday. Enjoy your weekend.
Goodbye.